I'm giving you 30 minutes to cook dinner for 10 people. You can feed the baby tomorrow. My husband snapped from the doorway, just as I was barely dragging myself in from the maternity hospital with a newborn in my arms. But right behind me came my father, and what he did to him was something you wouldn't wish on anyone, even in your worst nightmare. Hello, my dears. Write in the comments where you're listening from. We wish you an enjoyable listening experience. A gray October sky hung low over the city's industrial district, heavy with leaden clouds that kept releasing a cold, fine drizzle. The wind chased yellow leaves and scraps of newspaper across the asphalt, and the air smelled of smoke from a nearby factory and the coming winter. A battered yellow taxi with peeling license plates slowly pulled up to a 9-story building on the outskirts of town, one of countless identical gray giants built back in the 70s. Deborah Bailey sat in the back seat, clutching a pink bundle with her tiny daughter pressed to her chest, feeling sharp, piercing pain shoot through her body with every bump and turn. The stitches from the emergency C-section performed at 37 weeks because of the umbilical cord wrapped around the baby's neck hadn't healed yet. Every careless movement reminded her of the surgery. Dr. Watkins had firmly warned her to avoid any physical strain, not to lift anything heavier than the baby, to lie down more and rest. But who thinks about that when you're bringing home your first, long-awaited, hard-won miracle? Madison. That was the name they gave their daughter, after Cody's grandmother. She was born tiny, just 2 kilos 400 grams, but healthy. At first, the neonatologists wanted to keep her in special care, but the baby turned out to be a real fighter. She gained weight quickly, latched well, and after a week they were discharged home. All week Deborah had been waiting for Cody to come visit them. She imagined him walking into the ward with a bouquet of flowers and a box of chocolates, marveling at their daughter's tiny fingers, counting her eyelashes, amazed at how small and fragile she was. In her dreams, he sat beside the bed, holding Madison in his arms, unable to take his eyes off her. He made plans for how they would raise her, which daycare she'd go to, what activities they'd choose. But Cody never showed up. He called every other day, repeating the same stock phrases. He was swamped at work, he had an important project, he'd definitely come by once things settled down. At first, Deborah believed him. She even made excuses for him to the other women in the ward, who were surprised that the caring husband never appeared. Other mothers received visits every day. Husbands stood under the maternity hospital windows, waving, shouting words of love. "We're here, sweetheart," the driver muttered. He was a stocky man in his 50s, unshaven, with fingers that smelled of tobacco. He glanced in the rearview mirror at the pale woman with the baby, clearly eager to finish the ride. "That'll be $40. And 5 more for the child seat rental." Deborah awkwardly reached into her worn handbag with one hand, careful not to wake sleeping Madison. The baby snuffled softly, occasionally whimpering in her sleep, and Deborah was afraid to disturb her. The money for the taxi was the last cash left in her wallet, the pitiful remainder of what her mother had given her before leaving to stay with her sister in Philadelphia. Cody never came to pick them up from the hospital, even though she'd called him that morning and agreed on 2 o'clock. At first, she waited for him by the main entrance, sitting on a bench with her bag and the bundle in her arms. Minutes passed, then hours. The sun sank toward sunset, the air grew colder, and Cody still didn't show. Deborah called him again and again, but his phone was either unreachable or he rejected the calls. Finally, at 7 in the evening, he answered. "Listen, Deborah, everything's on fire at work. My boss made me redo a report, says he needs a new version by tomorrow morning. Can you get home on your own? Take a taxi or something?" That was when Deborah felt something cold settle in her chest. Was work really more important to him than his wife and newborn child? Did he seriously not understand how hard it would be for her to get home alone with a baby? "Cody, I just had surgery. And Madison is so small. Maybe you could still dash." "I can't," he snapped, cutting her off. "She's not that small. You'll manage. I don't have time to be bothered with every little thing." And he hung up. Nurse Gloria, a kind, heavy-set woman nearing retirement age, saw the whole scene and just shook her gray head. "What's wrong with men these days, sweetheart? They used to camp outside the maternity hospital for days, bringing flowers, gifts for their wives and the doctors. Champagne, chocolates. And now what? Sending your wife and newborn home in a taxi and talking in that tone, too." Gloria helped her pack her things, walked her to the exit, even gave her the number of a good taxi. But her words kept ringing in Deborah's ears as she counted out her last bills to pay the driver. Maybe Cody really was overwhelmed at work. Maybe there truly was an emergency, and his boss was demanding the impossible. After all, their construction company often had crunch times, especially in the fall, when projects had to be finished before the cold set in. Or maybe he was preparing a surprise at home. Decorating the apartment, buying flowers, cooking a festive dinner. After all, the birth of a first child is a huge event, one that's supposed to change everything for the better. The driver indifferently unloaded her small hospital bag onto the wet sidewalk and, without even saying goodbye, drove off, leaving the woman with her baby alone at the entrance, surrounded by puddles and autumn slush. Deborah stood there for a moment by the familiar building, getting used to the weight in her arms and the sharp pain in her abdomen. Her legs trembled with weakness. In the hospital, she'd barely been on her feet, and now she had to carry not just herself, but her child too. Madison grumbled in her sleep. Deborah's heart instantly clenched with worry. Was the baby too cold in this damp weather? Would the wind get to her? Was she wrapped too tightly? Or maybe too warmly? Deborah gently adjusted the pink hat, checked whether the blanket had slipped. Was the baby's breathing okay? The maternal instincts that had awakened in her from the first day of her daughter's life made her anxious about everything. The intercom in their building hadn't worked for over 6 months. Local teenagers had smashed it back in the spring, and the management company still hadn't found the money to fix it. So she had to stand by the front door, waiting for someone to come in or go out. Luckily, she didn't have to wait long. An elderly neighbor, Mrs. Walsh, appeared from the entrance with a shopping bag in her hand, apparently returning from the store. Seeing Deborah with a baby in her arms, she threw up her hands and nearly dropped the groceries. "Oh, Deborah, dear, congratulations. You finally gave birth. A girl or a boy? Oh, how tiny she is. So little. And where's our Cody? Why isn't he here? Why isn't he helping you?" Deborah forced a smile, trying not to show how painful it was to answer these perfectly natural questions. "He's busy at work, Mrs. Walsh. Turning in an important project, working late." "Working, you say?" Mrs. Walsh replied skeptically, carefully studying her neighbor's pale face and trembling hands. She'd lived long enough to recognize when a woman was making excuses for an irresponsible husband. "Well, of course. Work. And how are you feeling, dear? Must be hard after surgery." "I'll manage. Little by little." Deborah didn't want to complain, but Mrs. Walsh understood everything without words. She picked up the hospital bag and helped her to the elevator, muttering the whole way, "Oh, what times we live in. Men used to know what family and responsibility meant. And now? All right, dear, go upstairs, get some rest. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. I'm on the 2nd floor, always home." The elevator in their building worked only half the time, but today she got lucky the car was waiting on the 1st floor. Deborah stepped inside carefully, pressing her daughter to her chest and barely breathing. It smelled of urine and cheap tobacco. The walls were covered in obscene graffiti and phone numbers for escorts. The floor was littered with cigarette butts and spit. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was getting to the 5th floor, to her home, where warmth, comfort, and a caring husband were waiting. As the elevator climbed, Deborah daydreamed and made plans for the next few days. Surely Cody had prepared something special for their return. Maybe he'd ordered flowers she loved white roses so much. Or bought a cake that said, "Welcome home, baby Madison." Maybe he'd even invited his parents from the neighboring town so they could meet their granddaughter. During the pregnancy, they had planned and dreamed so much about the future. Cody bought books on parenting, learned how to hold a newborn properly, how to bathe one, how to understand what a baby needs. Together they chose a crib at the baby store, argued over what color the nursery walls should be, bought the first tiny shirts and bonnets. Cody even signed up for a class for new fathers, even though his friends laughed at him. Back then, they seemed like the perfect couple, ready for every challenge of parenthood. Cody read child development books out loud, massaged Deborah's back when she got tired of carrying the big belly, assembled the nursery furniture. He was so attentive and caring, always saying he would be the best father in the world. What had changed in just a few weeks? Maybe he had simply gotten scared of the responsibility. Or maybe there really was a serious crisis at work. Deborah tried to find excuses for his behavior, not wanting to admit that the man she loved could have changed so drastically. The key trembled in her hand, whether from post-surgery weakness, anxiety, or a bad feeling she couldn't explain. The lock didn't click right away. She had to struggle with it before the door finally gave way. And when it did, a thick, suffocating smell hit her so hard that she instinctively stepped back and held her breath. The apartment air was heavy with tobacco smoke mixed with alcohol fumes, mustiness, and something sour and unpleasant. As if the windows hadn't been opened and nothing cleaned for weeks. The entryway was in complete chaos. Men's shoes of different sizes, clearly not just Cody's, lay scattered on the floor, along with dirty jackets and blazers, empty beer cans, vodka bottles, cigarette butts. On the key shelf lay playing cards and crumpled scraps of paper. But the worst sight was her favorite photograph lying on the floor in a broken frame, the one of her and Cody hugging by the sea on their honeymoon 2 years ago. Back then they had been so happy, tanned, in love. Cody was kissing her cheek, she was laughing with her eyes closed. Now the glass was shattered, and the photo was bent and stained with something brown, coffee or beer. Her heart sank. Carefully stepping over the shards so as not to cut her feet in her house slippers, Deborah went into the living room. What she saw there exceeded her worst fears. The room looked like a battlefield after a lost fight. Empty vodka, whiskey, and cheap wine bottles were strewn across the couch, some were broken, and the floor around it was sticky with spilled alcohol. The coffee table was piled high with dirty dishes crusted with dried food, plates with bones, glasses with greenish residue, forks and knives coated in hardened grease. Ashtrays overflowed with cigarette butts, and it was clear they hadn't only been smoking cigarettes here. The air carried a heavier smell. The rug Deborah loved so much, the one they had bought last year with all their savings, was stained with alcohol, burned by cigarettes, marked with strange smears. Playing cards were scattered everywhere, hearts, aces, spades, kings, diamonds, queens, along with scraps of paper covered in numbers, clearly used to keep score. The air was so stale and heavy it was hard to breathe. All the windows were tightly shut, the curtains drawn, and in the dim light the room felt even more depressing. The choking smell of tobacco and alcohol seemed to have soaked into everything, the furniture, the wallpaper, even the ceiling. Madison began to wake up, whimpering softly and squirming in her blanket. Instinctively, Deborah hurried out of this nightmare into the bedroom, hoping that at least there's some corner of cleanliness and comfort had survived. But the nursery they had set up with such love greeted her no better. The crib was piled with men's clothes, shirts, socks, documents. Bottles and glasses stood on the changing table, which itself was covered in stains. With a heavy heart, Deborah cleared the clutter from the crib and gently laid her daughter inside. It was the very crib they had bought in the 7th month of pregnancy at a large baby store on the outskirts of the city. She remembered that day so clearly, it had been so happy. They wandered through the aisles, choosing between a pink and a white crib, touching different mattresses, arguing about where to place the furniture in the nursery. Cody had been so excited about becoming a father. He asked the salespeople about paint safety, studied quality certificates, even asked to be shown how to assemble the crib properly. The saleswoman, an elderly woman with kind eyes, smiled fondly at them. "It's so wonderful to see young fathers being so responsible," she said. "Men used to never come into baby stores, they thought it was women's business. And you're so caring." Cody had blushed with pleasure and dove even deeper into choosing baby things. They spent almost 4 hours in the store, picking not only the crib, but also a stroller, a car seat, clothes for the baby. Cody insisted on buying the best of everything, refusing to cut corners. "Our baby should have the very best," he said, examining tiny onesies. "We're working and doing all this for them." Where was that caring future father now? What had happened to the Cody who had prepared so tenderly for their child's arrival? "Cody?" Deborah called softly, adjusting her daughter's blanket and trying not to wake her fully. "I'm home." "We're home." From the kitchen came the sound of dishes crashing. Something heavy had fallen and shattered on the floor. Then came a stream of harsh, filthy swearing Deborah had never heard from her husband before. Heavy, unsteady footsteps followed, as if the person could barely stay on his feet. The bedroom door flew open with a bang so loud that Madison flinched and burst into tears. A man stood in the doorway whom Deborah barely recognized as her husband. Cody looked awful. Unshaven, his face covered in stubble, his eyes red and inflamed with strangely yellow whites. His shirt was wrinkled and filthy, stained with food and alcohol, his hair sticking out in all directions. A heavy stench came from him: sweat, booze, and something sweet and cloying she didn't recognize. This was nothing like the Cody she knew and loved, the neat, well-groomed man who had taken her to the maternity hospital a week ago. Back then he'd been clean-shaven, in a fresh shirt that smelled of cologne. He'd kissed her on the forehead and promised everything would be fine, promised he'd come see her and the baby every day. "Well, look who finally showed up," he said through clenched teeth, not even glancing at the crib where their daughter lay. "Thought you'd just stay there." Deborah felt her knees give out, not from physical weakness, but from the cold way he looked at her. Like she wasn't his wife who had just given birth to his daughter, but some annoying neighbor. "Cody, that's Madison, our daughter. Don't you want to see her? She looks like you." "Not now," he waved her off. "Listen, I've got an emergency here. Guys from the company are coming, very important people. You've got 30 minutes to make dinner for 10. And you can feed the baby tomorrow. She'll survive." Deborah felt the world tilt. 30 minutes? Dinner for 10 people? She had just been discharged, she could barely stand, she had a newborn, and he was demanding the impossible. "Cody, honey, I just got home from the hospital. My stitches haven't healed, I can't stand at the stove for long. And Madison might wake up, she'll need to eat." "Can't?" His voice turned hard, metallic. "So who's going to do it then? Me. I've got the most important meeting of my life. My whole future depends on it. These people can decide my fate, and you're talking to me about stitches." He stepped closer, and Deborah caught the smell of alcohol. Cody had clearly been drinking for more than one day. "Your job is the house and the family, so get to the kitchen. And in 30 minutes I want everything ready. Salads, hot food, appetizers. A full table. And don't you dare start whining." "But, Cody, I get that the meeting is important, but maybe we could order something. Or move it to tomorrow. I literally gave birth yesterday." "Order?" He laughed bitterly. "With what money? You think I've got cash falling out of my pockets? It all went to your hospital bills and meds. No, you were cooking yourself, like a proper wife." Deborah sank onto the edge of the bed, exhaustion and despair crashing over her. Was this really the same man who had proposed a year and a half ago, sworn he loved her, promised to protect and care for her? The man who had been so happy when he found out she was pregnant, bought her vitamins, carried her in his arms? Madison began to cry softly, and Deborah instinctively reached toward the crib, but Cody stepped in front of her. "I said tomorrow. Dinner first. My guests will be here in 25 minutes. At that moment, the front door creaked open. Calm, confident footsteps sounded in the entryway. Cody frowned. He was sure he'd locked the door. "Who the hell is that now?" he muttered. A tall, gray-haired man in a dark, crisp suit appeared in the bedroom doorway. Deborah recognized him instantly, even though she hadn't expected to see him here. Her father, Scott, took in the cluttered room, the drunk son-in-law, his pale daughter, and then slowly, unhurriedly he removed his coat and neatly hung it over the back of a chair. "Hello, sweetheart," he said quietly but clearly as he approached Deborah. "How are you? How's my granddaughter?" His voice was calm, but Deborah saw something in his eyes that made Cody go pale and step back without thinking. Scott was not a man you joked with. A former police officer, then a detective, and for the last 10 years the head of security at the largest steel plant in the county. A man who knew how to get justice and who never let anyone hurt his family and walk away. Scott silently walked around the room, studying every corner. His trained eyes caught details an ordinary person might miss: cigarette marks on the windowsill, empty ampoules from some kind of medication in the trash, scraps of paper under the couch covered in IOUs. 40 years in law enforcement had taught him to read a scene like an open book. Cody shifted nervously from foot to foot, avoiding his father-in-law's gaze. The drunken swagger vanished instantly. Scott's presence sobered anyone who had something to hide. And Cody had plenty to hide, things Deborah and her family were better off not knowing. "Dad, how did you get here?" Deborah asked softly, rocking the crying Madison in her arms. Her voice trembled with mixed feelings: relief that her father had come, and shame at the state he'd found their family in. Gloria from the maternity ward called me, Scott answered evenly, his eyes never leaving his son-in-law. She said you went home alone with the baby. Your husband was nowhere to be seen. I knew right away something was wrong, so I came to check. He went to the crib and gently stroked his granddaughter's cheek. A faint smile appeared on his stern face the first of the evening. Beautiful girl. Takes after her mother. What's her name? Madison, Deborah said, feeling tears rise in her eyes. Madison, her grandfather repeated. Good name. Strong. Cody decided the silence had dragged on too long and tried to take control. The drunk confidence hadn't fully drained out of him yet, and he still believed he could steer the situation. Scott, you worried for nothing, he began in a syrupy voice. I just had a crunch at work, we were turning in an important project. I couldn't drop everything and run to the hospital. Someone's got to make money, especially now that we've got a child. Scott turned to him slowly. Something dangerous flickered in his gray eyes. A crunch, huh? His voice was quiet, but there was a threat in that quiet. And how many days has this crunch been going on? Well, about a week. Maybe a little more. You know how it is, the client is demanding, keeps making us redo everything. I see. And I'm curious, Scott said, pulling a thin folder from the inside pocket of his jacket and opening it without haste. Why is it, then, that according to your company's gate records, you haven't shown up at work in 10 days? Cody's face went white. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. And I'm curious about something else, Scott went on, flipping through the papers. Where did you get debts at 7 different sportsbooks around the city, totaling $80,000? And why is Victor Crawford, who people call Vic the Blade, asking for your home address? Deborah felt her breath catch. 80,000 in debt? Sportsbooks? Vic the Blade, she'd heard that name in crime reports. One of the most dangerous collectors in the city, a man known for the harshest methods of getting his money. Where did you get that information? Cody rasped, the old arrogance completely gone from his voice. Not your concern, Scott cut him off coldly. My concern is my family's safety. And when some piece of trash puts my daughter and granddaughter's lives at risk, I take action. He took a step toward Cody, and Cody instinctively backed up against the wall. You thought I wouldn't find out? Thought you'd keep lying about staying late at work? Scott's voice grew quieter and more dangerous. While you were actually hanging around gambling dens, blowing family money? Money set aside for your child? I was trying to win it back, Cody stammered. I had a system, I was so close to winning. Shut up. Scott barked, making Cody flinch as if he'd been struck. Don't take me for an idiot. I've seen hundreds like you. All of you were almost winning. All of you had a system. And in the end, you destroyed families and left children with nothing. Deborah sat frozen, rocking her crying daughter, unable to believe what she was hearing. So all those weeks she'd been in the hospital, worried about the baby's health, Cody had been burning through their savings in casinos? All the money they'd saved for baby things, for the stroller, for the first months of their child's life? How much of our money did you lose? She asked quietly, and there was steel in her voice that Cody had never heard before. Deborah, sweetheart, you don't understand, he tried to explain, but Scott cut him off sharply. Answer my daughter. How much? Cody hesitated, shifting from foot to foot, but under his father-in-law's unblinking stare, he gave in. Almost everything we had saved for the baby. But I thought I'd win it back. I had a plan. $27,000, Scott said flatly. That's how much was in your joint account 3 months ago. Right now, there's $700 left. For 2 years Deborah had put money aside from every paycheck, denied herself pleasures, bought only the bare essentials, sewed baby clothes herself instead of buying them, saved on everything for her child's future, while all this time he had been wasting their savings on his addiction. And that's not all, Scott continued, flipping through the documents. You also took out a loan using the apartment as collateral. $15,000. Lost that too. Tomorrow the bank starts foreclosure proceedings. The words landed like a sentence. Deborah looked at her husband as if seeing him for the first time. Who was this man she had married? How could she have been so wrong? You put our apartment up as collateral, she whispered. The home where our daughter is supposed to grow up? Deborah, I didn't think it would turn out like this. Cody tried to step toward her, but Scott blocked his way. Don't go near her, he said quietly, but with such force that Cody froze in place. You've done enough damage already. Madison cried louder, reacting to the tension in the room. Deborah pressed her to her chest, trying to calm her, while she herself was on the verge of a breakdown. Dad, what are we going to do now? She asked in a trembling voice. Where will we live? How will we support the baby? Scott placed a hand on her shoulder. Don't worry, sweetheart. It will be handled. But first, I need to clarify a few things. He turned back to Cody. So let's see. You owe money to criminal elements. You haven't been to work for 10 days. You gambled away all the family savings and mortgaged the apartment. And now you're demanding that your wife, who just gave birth, cook dinner for some of your buddies. Am I understanding the situation correctly? Scott, you don't understand. Cody began, but his father-in-law cut him off. No, you don't understand. You think you can destroy other people's lives without consequences? You think my daughter will put up with your behavior? His voice grew harsher with every word, and Cody felt like a tiny insect in front of an enraged bear. And now explain to me why you needed these guests, Scott went on. Who exactly are you planning to host in this condition, in this apartment? Cody hesitated, realizing he was trapped. They're just business partners. Want to discuss a new project. Keep lying, Scott said with a cold smirk. Or better yet, tell the truth. Who are you really waiting for? Under his father-in-law's piercing gaze, Cody finally broke. His shoulders slumped, and he spoke hoarsely. Vic the Blade and his people. They said they'd come tonight to talk about the debts. I thought if I welcomed them properly, fed them, maybe they'd give me more time. Deborah gasped. So he was planning to host criminals in their home? In the apartment where a newborn baby was? You were going to put my daughter and granddaughter in danger? Scott's voice dropped to a deadly calm. Bring Crawford's people into a house with an infant? The question hung in the air. In the silence, only Madison's cries and Cody's heavy breathing could be heard. He knew he had crossed a line there was no coming back from. Scott pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Hello, Nicholas? This is Bailey. I need you to make a few calls. Yes, urgently. Victor Crawford is planning to visit my son-in-law tonight. Explain to him that this would be a bad idea. Yes, put it exactly that way. I strongly advise against it. He listened, then nodded. Good. And one more thing, find out everything about Cody Tate's debts. Who he owes, how much, on what terms. And find a way to settle it. Yes, I understand it won't be cheap. We'll find the money. He ended the call, put the phone away, and looked at Cody. Consider the Crawford issue handled. But the debts will still have to be paid. Only now, not to him. To me. Scott, I don't even know how to thank you. Cody stammered, but his father-in-law stopped him. Don't celebrate yet. I'm not finished. I have an offer for you, one you won't be able to refuse. There was steel in his voice, and Cody's mouth went dry. Tomorrow morning, you go to court and file for divorce. No alimony, no property claims, no right to see the child. You transfer the apartment to Deborah and take all the debts on yourself. In return, I don't pass information about your financial schemes to the tax authorities, and I don't initiate inspections by the relevant agencies. Cody stared at him, stunned. But that's not fair. Madison is my daughter. Your daughter? Scott's voice turned icy. After what you've been doing these past months? After you put your wife's and child's lives at risk? You lost the right to call yourself a father the moment you first sat down at a gambling table. Deborah listened as if in a dream. Divorce? She wasn't ready for such drastic decisions. Yes, Cody had turned out to be someone else entirely, but he was still her child's father. Dad, maybe we shouldn't rush, she said softly. Maybe he'll change? Scott turned to her, and in his eyes she saw the deep exhaustion of a man who had witnessed too many human downfalls. My girl, I've worked with people for 40 years. I've seen addicts, alcoholics, gamblers. Believe me, they don't change, at least not until they truly want to. And judging by what he did today, he doesn't want to. He walked to the window and looked down into the courtyard, where under the streetlights suspicious figures were already gathering near black cars. And we don't have time for experiments. Crawford may be called off, but other creditors won't sleep. Tomorrow the bank starts the foreclosure process. The day after tomorrow, new friends of your husband may show up. Are you ready to risk your daughter's life for his slim chance at redemption? Deborah stayed silent, rocking the crying Madison and trying to process everything she'd just heard. Her mind was in chaos. Too many shocks had hit her in one evening. That morning she had been a happy new mother, heading home to a loving husband, and now it turned out her entire life had been built on lies. $80,000 in debt. A mortgaged apartment. Gangsters who could show up at any moment. And a husband who turned out to be a pathological gambler, ready to risk his own child's safety for his addiction. I don't know, she finally whispered. I need time to think. This is all so sudden. My girl, I know this is hard, Scott said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. But we really don't have time to think for long. Every day we wait increases the risks. He took several more documents from the folder and spread them out on the table. See for yourself. This is a notice from the bank about overdue loan payments. Tomorrow, October 18th, they start forced foreclosure proceedings. Here's information on debts to sportsbooks. Besides Crawford, there are 4 more organizations demanding repayment. And this. He showed her photos taken by a hidden camera. Your husband at the Golden Fortune Casino on Riverside Avenue. 3 days ago. While you were lying in the maternity ward, waiting for his calls. In the photos, Cody was sitting at a gaming table, eagerly placing bets. Bottles of alcohol stood nearby, girls in revealing outfits around him. He looked relaxed, happy, nothing like a man whose wife was giving birth in a hospital. Deborah felt something inside her finally snap. So while she was in labor, worrying about her baby's health, he was having fun at a casino. While she waited every day for his visit, he was blowing their last family money. Why are you showing me this? She asked her father quietly. Because you need to know the truth, Scott replied. All of it. You have to make decisions based on facts, not illusions. Cody had been standing against the wall the whole time, pale as a sheet. He knew his house of lies had completely collapsed. All his secrets were out, and now his wife was seeing who he really was. Deborah, sweetheart, he tried to speak in a pleading tone, you have to understand, I didn't want this. It's a disease, you know? I couldn't stop. But now I get it, I was wrong. I'll change, I swear. Change? Deborah looked at him with tear-filled eyes. How will you change, Cody? How will you get our money back? How will you explain to Madison why she doesn't have a home? How will you apologize for putting her life in danger? There was steel in her voice Cody had never heard before. The soft, forgiving Deborah, who always excused and protected him, was turning into someone else, a woman ready to fight for her child's future. I'll find a job, he said quickly. A good one. I'll give all the money to the family. I won't spend a single cent on gambling again, I swear. What job? Scott asked coldly. You were fired from the construction company 2 weeks ago. For skipping work. Cody went pale again. How did his father-in-law know so much? And getting hired elsewhere won't be easy for you, Scott continued. Your reputation is ruined. Rumors about your debts have already reached HR departments at major companies. Who needs an employee criminals might come after? He pulled out another document. This is a reference from your last job. The director writes that you proved to be unreliable, abused alcohol, and had serious discipline issues. Want me to read it out loud? Deborah closed her eyes, feeling the world she thought was real finally collapse. How many lies had there been in their relationship? How many times had Cody deceived her, talking about success at work, bonuses, promotions? My mom called last week, she suddenly remembered. She asked how things were going at work. You said you'd gotten a promotion and a raise. That a bright future was waiting for us. Cody stayed silent, unable to meet her gaze. So that was a lie too, Deborah went on. Just like everything else. Your business trips, your overtime, your important meetings with clients. Deborah, try to understand. I didn't want to upset you, Cody tried to justify himself. You were pregnant. You weren't supposed to get nervous. You didn't want to upset me, her voice rose. And now? Now you didn't mind upsetting me? Bringing criminals into our home, forcing me to cook for them with a newborn in my arms? Madison, sensing her mother's tension, began crying even louder. Deborah pressed her to her chest, trying to calm her, but she herself was on the verge of a breakdown. Scott watched closely. 40 years in law enforcement had taught him to read people like open books. He saw that his daughter was in critical condition, physically exhausted after childbirth, emotionally shattered by the truth, driven by a powerful maternal instinct to protect her child. All of it together was a volatile mix. Deborah, quiet now, he said. Why don't you feed Madison? And Cody and I will finish our conversation. There was an unspoken threat in his voice that Cody heard perfectly. Being left alone with his father-in-law was the last thing he wanted, but he had no choice. Deborah looked at her father, then at her husband, and nodded. She really did need to be alone, to gather her thoughts. She took her daughter and went to the nursery, where a comfortable feeding chair stood. When the door closed behind her, Scott stepped toward Cody. There was nothing left of the caring grandfather in his movements, now only the harsh determination of a man used to getting justice by any means necessary. Now we'll talk without witnesses, he said quietly. And so you fully understand how serious this is, I'm going to explain a few things to you. He took out his phone and showed Cody a photo. Know what this is? That's you leaving the Quick Cash office on Main Street. 2 weeks ago. The day you took out a payday loan at 400% annual interest for $3,000. Want to guess what you spent it on? Cody stayed silent, knowing any answer would only make things worse. And this, Scott said, showing another photo, is you at a pawnshop on Oak Avenue. Pawning Deborah's wedding ring, the one she forgot at home when she went to the maternity hospital. You got $500 for it and lost it the same day on slot machines at the mall next door. Cody's face turned gray. He hadn't even imagined he was being watched this closely. But the most interesting part, Scott continued, is this video. He played a recording on his phone. On the screen was Cody in the same Golden Fortune casino, but this time he was talking to a blonde woman in a revealing dress. There was no sound, but their gestures and expressions made it clear it wasn't just friendly conversation. Hendon Morgan, 23 years old, an economics student. Works part-time as a casino hostess. You've been seeing her for a month and a half. You rent a room at the downtown and every Wednesday and Friday. Cody felt his legs go weak. So this was known too. Want to know how much you spent on her? Scott went on mercilessly. $2,400 in 6 weeks. Gifts, restaurants, hotels. Money that should have gone toward baby things and food for your pregnant wife. How did you? Where did you get? Cody stammered. Where did I get this information? Scott slipped the phone back into his pocket. I have friends in many different agencies. When my family's safety is at stake, I use every resource available. He walked to the window and looked down into the courtyard again. See those people near the black cars? That's Crawford's crew. They've been waiting for half an hour to come up to you. But they haven't because someone explained to them that it would be a very bad idea. Cody looked out the window and saw several men in dark clothes smoking near expensive cars, glancing up at their building from time to time. Tomorrow morning they'll get a different assignment, Scott continued. Instead of paying you a visit, they'll have to deal with something more serious on the other side of town. And your debts will transfer to me. Scott, I don't understand. You will. I'm paying off all your debts in full. All $80,000, plus interest and penalties. I'll close the mortgage loan too. And I'll cover the lawyers for the divorce paperwork. Cody's mouth fell open. Why would his father-in-law spend that kind of money on him? In return, you do what I said, Scott went on. Tomorrow morning you file for divorce. You waive any claims to property and the child. You signed everything that needs to be signed. And you disappear from my daughter's life forever. But that's not fair. Cody exploded. Why should I give up my rights? Scott turned to him slowly, and the cold in his eyes made Cody take a step back. Rights? What rights? The right to destroy a woman's and a child's life? The right to put them in danger? The right to lie and steal? He stepped toward Cody. You lost all rights the moment you first laid a hand on family money. And you never had a right to the child in the first place. Because a father isn't the one who conceived, he's the one who raises, protects, and provides. I'll change. Give me a chance. A chance? Scott let out a bitter laugh. How many chances have you already wasted? When you lied to your wife about work? When you spent baby money on gambling? When you cheated on her with a girl from the casino? When you were going to welcome criminals into your home? Each word landed like a punch. Cody knew he had nothing to say. I have two ways to solve your problem, Scott said, lowering himself into an armchair. The first is civilized. You accept my terms, you get your debts fully paid, and you get the chance to start over in another city. I can even help you find work. I have contacts in other states. And the second? Cody asked quietly, though he was afraid of the answer. You won't like the second, Scott replied coldly. Tomorrow morning, all the information about your financial schemes goes to the IRS, the DA's office, and the police. A criminal case is opened under several charges: fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. Plus civil lawsuits from the creditors you've harmed. He stood and went to the window. Crawford gets a green light to deal with you by any methods he wants. And I stop caring what happens to you. Can you imagine how long you'd last then? Cold sweat ran down Cody's back. He never would have believed his good-natured father-in-law could be this ruthless. You have 5 minutes to think, Scott added. While Deborah feeds the baby. Then she'll come back, and you'll tell her your decision. Cody stayed silent, scrambling for a way out. But there was no way out. He had backed himself into a corner with his own hands, and now it was time to pay. From the nursery came a soft melody. Deborah was singing a lullaby to her daughter. Her voice held exhaustion and sadness, but also endless tenderness, pure mother's love. Listening, Cody suddenly realized he had lost the most precious thing in his life. And he had lost it through his own stupidity. Fine, he said quietly at last. I agree. Scott nodded as if he'd expected that answer. Years in law enforcement had taught him to recognize the exact moment a person finally gives up. In Cody's eyes he saw not only fear, but something like relief, the relief of someone who had finally stopped carrying the unbearable weight of lies and deception. A wise decision, Scott said calmly. Now we'll go over the details. Tomorrow at 9 a.m., you show up at the courthouse on Riverside Avenue. The divorce petition is already prepared. You just sign. At 10, we meet at Notary Tara Owens on Cedar Street. There you'll sign the termination of parental rights and consent to transfer the apartment. Cody listened as if through fog. Just a few hours ago he'd been a married man, the father of a newborn daughter, the owner of his own home. Now it was all collapsing like a house of cards. And after that, he asked hoarsely. After that you'll receive documents confirming all debts are paid in full, reference letters for jobs in Seattle or Denver, your choice, and a plane ticket. Plus $1,500 to get you started. $1,500. Cody remembered when that amount had once seemed huge. Now it felt like crumbs compared to what he'd lost. One condition, Scott added. No attempts to contact Deborah or the child. No calls, no letters, no visits. No trying to find out how they're doing through mutual friends. You disappear from their lives completely and forever. And if I change my mind? Cody tried weakly. Scott pulled the last document from the folder, a thick stack of papers clipped together. Then this goes into effect. A full dossier on your activities over the past 2 years. Everything is in here: photos, videos, financial documents, witness statements. Enough for multiple criminal cases. He flipped through a few pages. Fraud with loan documents up to 6 years. Embezzlement of family funds up to 3. Tax evasion another 3. Plus civil suits totaling over $100,000. Cody realized he was caught in a perfectly set trap. Scott hadn't acted on impulse. He'd prepared for this conversation, gathered evidence, thought through every step. You've been watching me for a while? Cody asked. From the moment Deborah said she was having trouble at home, Scott replied. She didn't complain openly, but I saw how she changed. She became nervous, withdrawn. She stopped talking about your future plans. And when a woman stops dreaming out loud, it means something is seriously wrong. He stood and walked to the photo on the wall, the one where Deborah and Cody were smiling on their wedding day. 2 years ago I gave you my daughter, believing you would make her happy. I saw how much she loved you, how she believed in your future. I even helped you with the down payment on this apartment. Remember? Cody remembered. Scott had given them $7,000 as a wedding gift, and they'd been able to get a mortgage for a decent place. Now I'm taking her back, his father-in-law continued. Because you didn't deserve my trust. Worse, you betrayed it in the lowest possible way. The singing from the nursery stopped. Deborah had likely finished feeding the baby and was putting her down to sleep. She would come out soon, and Cody would have to tell her what he'd agreed to. How do I explain it to her? He asked, lost. You tell the truth, Scott said sharply. That you understand your mistakes, and you believe it's best for everyone if you leave their lives. That you want to give her a chance to find a decent man who will be a good father to Madison. And if she doesn't believe me? She will. Because it'll be the only true thing you've said in months. The nursery door opened, and Deborah came out with her sleeping daughter in her arms. She gently laid the baby in the crib and turned to the men. Her face showed a decision had been made. It seemed the quiet time alone with her child had helped her clear her thoughts. I've made my decision, she said softly but firmly. Cody, we need to get divorced. Cody had expected to hear those words, but they still hit him like a bolt from the blue. Agreeing to a divorce under pressure from his father-in-law was one thing, hearing it from his wife herself was something else entirely. Deborah, she started, but she raised her hand to stop him. Don't, Cody. I thought a lot while I was feeding Madison. About us, about our past, about the future that lies ahead. And I realized we don't have a future. She spoke calmly, without hysteria or accusations, but there was an unshakable resolve in her voice. Not because you lost the money, she continued. Money can be earned again. Not because you cheated, betrayal can be forgiven if there is love. And not even because you lied, lies can be overcome if there's a real desire to start over. She walked over to the window and looked out into the yard, where Crawford's people were still standing. But you were ready to put our child's life at risk. You were going to bring people into this home, people who solve problems with violence while our newborn daughter was here. And that's something I can't forgive. Deborah turned back to Cody, and he saw in her eyes not anger or resentment, but something far worse, indifference. A mother has no right to risk her child's safety for any feelings. Even for love for the child's father. And as it turns out, I don't know who you are anymore. Cody felt his throat tighten. He could see he had lost her completely, not just as a wife, but as someone who had once trusted him. I understand that you're right, he said hoarsely. And I also think it's better for us to divorce. Deborah nodded, as if she had expected those words. Then we're both in agreement. That's good. It means no long court battles and no scandals. And Madison? Cody asked, looking at his sleeping daughter. Madison will live with me. That's only natural. She's very little. She needs her mother. And when she grows up? Deborah paused, choosing her words. When she grows up, I'll tell her about you. I'll say she had a father who loved her, but couldn't stay by her side because of his problems. The words sounded like an epitaph for their marriage. Cody understood that Deborah had already moved him into the past as someone who had been part of their lives, but no longer was. Thank you, he whispered. For not turning her against me. I won't turn her against you or in your favor, Deborah replied. When she's grown, she'll decide for herself how to feel about it. Scott had stayed silent the entire time, watching the conversation. He could see that his daughter was handling the situation far better than he had expected. Maternal instinct and natural wisdom were helping her make the right decisions. There are still a few things we need to settle, he said. Where will you and Madison live after the divorce? This apartment is too big for the two of you, and the memories here aren't exactly pleasant. Deborah thought about it. Staying in this apartment would indeed be hard. Every corner would remind her of shattered hopes. Maybe we could rent something smaller, she suggested. A one-bedroom in a good neighborhood. Or you can move in with me, her father offered. I have a 3-bedroom place, plenty of space. Madison will be fine her own nursery, a quiet area, a park nearby. I don't know, Dad. I don't want to be a burden. A burden? Scott said, genuinely surprised. You're my daughter, and Madison is my granddaughter. Family sticks together in hard times. He stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. Besides, I'll feel calmer if you're nearby. The first months after the divorce won't be easy. This way I can help with the baby, and you can rest and recover after childbirth. Deborah looked at her sleeping daughter and nodded. All right. That probably is the best option. Thank you, Dad. Cody listened to this conversation with pain in his heart. They were planning a future without him, as if he no longer existed. But he knew he had brought it all on himself. What about my things? He asked. Take your personal belongings, Deborah replied. Leave the furniture and appliances, they'll be needed for the new owners of the apartment. New owners? I'm going to sell the apartment, she explained. There are too many painful memories here. It's better to start a new life in a new place. Scott nodded approvingly. His daughter was thinking clearly and practically. Then here's what I suggest, he said. Cody packs his personal items today and goes to stay with his parents. Tomorrow we handle the divorce and all the legal paperwork. The day after tomorrow, he leaves for a new city to start over. And Madison and I? Deborah asked. You'll move in with me tomorrow evening. I'll invite Gloria from the maternity ward. She agreed to help during the first weeks. She's experienced and knows how to care for newborns. Deborah felt relief wash over her. The thought of being alone with an infant frightened her, especially given her physical condition after surgery. Now about finances, Scott continued. An account has already been opened in your name with $15,000. That's for the initial period diapers, baby food, clothes for Madison. And money for your recovery. Dad, that's too much, Deborah began. It's the bare minimum, her father cut her off. A child is expensive, and you won't be able to work for now. When Madison grows a bit and you're ready to return from maternity leave, we'll figure out the next steps. Cody understood that his family was arranging their lives without him, not just emotionally, but financially as well. Scott was fixing all the problems Cody had created with his actions. May I look at her one last time? He asked quietly, nodding toward the crib. Deborah hesitated, then nodded. Just don't wake her. Cody carefully stepped up to the crib and looked at his sleeping daughter. Madison breathed softly, occasionally twitching her tiny fingers. She was so small, so defenseless. And he would never see her grow up, take her first steps, say her first words. I'm sorry, little one, he whispered. I'm sorry I couldn't be a good father. He straightened up and turned to Deborah. I'll go pack my things. Deborah nodded without looking at him. I'll be in the kitchen. It needs to be cleaned up. Cody went into the bedroom to gather his belongings. Scott stayed in the nursery, watching his granddaughter. There was tenderness for the baby on his face, mixed with sadness over a family that had fallen apart. It'll be all right, Madison, he said softly to the baby. Grandpa will make sure you have a happy childhood. I promise. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Deborah washed dishes and cried. Not out of self-pity and not out of anger at Cody, but out of grief for the hopes that had collapsed. Just that morning she had dreamed about how they would raise their daughter together, how they would become a close, loving family. Now those dreams had turned to ash. But alongside the pain, another feeling was growing stronger in her heart, a determination to give her daughter the best life possible. A life without lies, without fear, without constant danger. Maternal love proved stronger than marital love, and that gave her the strength to move forward. From the bedroom came sounds. Cody was packing his things into a suitcase. Every rustle reminded Deborah that her old life was coming to an end. But strangely, it didn't scare her. It even gave her a sense of relief. The future was unknown, but it felt safer and more honest than the recent past. Cody stood in the middle of the bedroom with an empty suitcase in his hands, not knowing where to begin. His entire life fit into this room: clothes in the closet, books on the shelves, photos on the table, small keepsakes collected over years of marriage. Now he had to choose only the essentials and leave the rest behind forever. He opened the closet and started sorting through his clothes. There was the suit he had worn to marry Deborah 2 years ago. Back then he had felt so happy, so confident about the future. He remembered how nervous he'd been that morning, how Scott helped him tie his tie and joked that Cody was now part of their family forever. Forever turned out to be very short. There was the shirt Deborah had given him for his birthday 6 months ago. She had spent a long time choosing it, matching it with his other clothes, imagining how he would look in it at company events. Back then she still believed his stories about career growth, important projects, and a bright future for their family. And there was the sweater they bought together on their last trip to the seaside. It was May, when Deborah was 5 months pregnant. They walked along the promenade, made plans for the summer, talked about how they would spend the next vacation as three. Deborah had been so beautiful then, her belly not very big yet, her face glowing with happiness, her eyes shining with anticipation of motherhood. That evening in the hotel room, she placed his hand on her belly and said, "Can you feel her kicking? She's probably saying hello to her daddy." At that moment, Cody felt like the happiest man on earth. He had a loving wife, a child on the way, a career that seemed to be going well. Life felt settled. How had everything changed in just a few months? Where had he gone wrong? When exactly had he started lying, stealing, destroying what was most precious to him? It probably all began with that ill-fated office party in June. His co-workers invited him to relax after work and stop by a casino to try their luck. At first, Cody refused. Every dollar at home was counted. Pregnant Deborah needed vitamins, special food, regular checkups. But his co-workers insisted. "Come on, you'll lose $30 at most. You won't go broke. At least you'll get some adrenaline." And he put $30 on red at the roulette table. He won 60. A wave of euphoria hit him so sharp, so intense, that everything else in life suddenly seemed dull and gray. He bet again. Won again. Then again and again. He came home with $150 in his pocket and told Deborah he'd gotten a bonus for good work. She was so happy, hugging him, kissing him, telling him how proud she was. They used that money to buy a stroller for the baby, a beautiful, expensive one with lots of features. But the euphoria didn't fade. Cody kept thinking about that feeling, that adrenaline, that moment when fate chooses you. Work felt boring, everyday life tasteless. He wanted to feel like luck's favorite again. A week later, he went back to the casino. This time he lost the same $150, but it didn't stop him. On the contrary, now he had to win it back. The thrill pulled him in deeper, like quicksand. As Cody packed clothes into the suitcase, he remembered how he had gradually turned into someone else. Lying became routine at first, small lies, then more elaborate ones. Working late, helping a friend with repairs, a company event. Dozens of excuses to spend evenings in gambling halls. The money ran out quickly. His salary wasn't enough even for daily expenses, let alone gambling. Then he started quietly dipping into their savings, first $30 or $60. Deborah didn't notice such small amounts. Then $150, $300. When she asked where the money had gone, he blamed inflation, rising prices, unexpected expenses. Pregnant Deborah trusted him completely. She was focused on the baby, on preparing for childbirth, on setting up the nursery. She left financial matters to her husband, believing he understood them better. How painful it was to see that trust, knowing he was betraying it every single day. Cody took a photo from the shelf, the ultrasound picture where little Madison was visible. Deborah had cried with happiness then, and he had promised his daughter he would be the best dad in the world. Now the photo felt like a cruel joke. He carefully wrapped it in paper and put it in a suitcase. Let it be a reminder of what he had lost and of what he must never allow himself to become again. From the next room came quiet voices. Deborah and her father were discussing practical details of the move. Their voices sounded calm, businesslike. They were planning life without him, and it was going smoothly, without much trouble. As if his presence had only been in the way, and now that he was leaving, everything was finally falling into place. Maybe that was true. Maybe his departure wasn't a tragedy, but a release for all of them. Cody opened the desk drawer and took out his documents, his passport, diplomas, employment record. The work record had only 2 entries: hired by the construction company 3 years ago, and resigned 2 weeks ago. In reality, he'd been fired for absenteeism, but his boss had shown mercy and recorded it as a voluntary resignation. Along with the documents were letters, the ones Deborah had written to him during their short separation before the wedding, when she went to the village to care for her sick grandmother. He reread a few lines. "My dear Cody, I miss you terribly. Every day I think about our future, about how we'll live, what kind of home we'll build, how many children we'll have. I want a lot too, maybe even 3. Can you imagine how loud and happy our family will be?" They really had dreamed of a big family. Deborah wanted a daughter and 2 sons. He imagined teaching his sons to play soccer and taking his daughter to theaters and museums. Now he wouldn't have even 1 child. Cody carefully placed the letters into a separate folder. He had no right to take them, they were private, belonging more to Deborah than to him. But no one could forbid him from reading them one last time. From the kitchen came the sound of dishes being washed. Deborah was putting the apartment in order, perhaps for the last time. Tomorrow she would pack her things and her daughter's, prepare to move in with her father. She would start a new life in a new place, try to forget these 2 years as a bad dream. And him? What awaited him in Seattle or Denver? A new job, a rented apartment, loneliness. Trying to start over at 30, knowing that behind him lay the ruins of his former life. Scott had promised to help with employment. There would probably be some position: engineer, foreman, site supervisor. Not the most prestigious job, not a big salary, but enough to live on. The main thing was to stay away from casinos and betting shops. Not to repeat the mistakes of the past. But would he manage? Gambling addiction is a disease that's not easy to cure. Cody had read about it online when he was trying to understand what was happening to him. Gambling addiction can take years to treat, and not always successfully. Many people relapse again and again, destroying new relationships, losing new money. He took a book from the shelf, The Psychology of Gambling. He had bought it a month ago, trying to find a way to beat the addiction on his own. He'd read it, but it hadn't helped much. Knowing the problem didn't mean solving it. The book said the main trap for gamblers was trying to fix financial problems with more gambling. Lost $30, you need to win $60 to make it back. Lost $300, you need to bet $600 to recover it and even profit. The logic is ironclad, but flawed, because luck doesn't obey human needs. Cody understood this logically, but emotions were stronger than reason. Every time he sat at a gaming table, he truly believed that today luck would finally smile on him, that today he would win it all back and come home victorious. That today never came. Instead, another today arrived, the day he had to pay for all his mistakes at once. Surprisingly few things fit into the suitcase: 2 suits, a few shirts, jeans, sports clothes, documents, books. A whole man's life fit into one medium-sized suitcase. Everything else, the apartment, furniture, appliances, shared photos, gifts, belonged to a past that no longer existed. Cody closed the suitcase and looked around the room. Their photos were still on the nightstand: wedding pictures, honeymoon shots, vacation memories. In one of them, Deborah was laughing with her head thrown back while he kissed her cheek. Back then, they thought they would be happy forever. Should he take these photos with him? Or was it better to leave them here, as a memory of the time when there was still love in their lives? He went to the window and looked down into the yard. Crawford's people were still standing near the cars, but now they looked relaxed, even bored. Apparently, they'd been told to back off. Scott had kept his word, the threat was gone. How much effort had that taken? How many calls, how many agreements? He must have spent a lot of influence convincing Crawford to leave his son-in-law alone. And all of it for a man who had betrayed his daughter's trust, endangered his granddaughter, destroyed a family's happiness. Scott had every right to simply walk away, let events unfold on their own. But he didn't, because Deborah and Madison were not supposed to suffer for someone else's mistakes. That's what it meant to be a real man, a real father and grandfather, to protect your family not with words, but with actions. To take responsibility for your loved ones, even when it's costly. Cody had never become that kind of man. And maybe he never would. Footsteps sounded outside the door. Scott was coming to check on the packing. "Ready?" he asked, looking into the room. Cody nodded, pointing at the suitcase. "Yes. I'm packed." "Not much," Scott noted. "Everything important stays here," Cody replied, glancing at the photos. Scott walked to the window and looked out as well. "Crawford is leaving. Nothing more to worry about." "Thank you." For everything. Don't think me draw your own conclusions, Scott said sternly. You've been given a chance to start over. Not everyone gets that. Most people in your position pay the full price. He turned to Cody. I'm helping you not because of you. I'm doing it for Deborah and Madison. So they can live peacefully, without looking over their shoulders. Do you understand the difference? Cody understood. He wasn't the object of care, he was a problem that needed to be resolved in the least painful way. I understand. And I'll try to live up to this chance. Not my trust, Scott corrected him. You lost that for good. Live up to the chance you're being given. From the nursery came a soft cry. Madison had woken up. Deborah immediately responded, soothing her daughter with quiet words. There was such tenderness, such boundless love in her voice that it hurt Cody to listen. He would never again hear Deborah sing lullabies to their daughter. He would never see Madison's first smile, first steps, first words. He wouldn't read her bedtime stories, teach her to ride a bike, help with homework. All of that would go to another man, the one Deborah would meet in the future, the one she could trust with her heart and her daughter's safety. Strangely, the thought of that future husband didn't stir jealousy in Cody. On the contrary, he sincerely hoped Deborah would find a worthy man, someone who would love them both and never betray their trust. Madison is a beautiful girl, he said quietly. She'll be happy. She will, Scott answered firmly. I'll make sure of it. Cody took the suitcase by the handle. It was time to leave. The longer he delayed, the harder it would be for everyone. Can I say goodbye to Deborah? Scott nodded. Just no sentimental scenes. Enough tears have already been shed. They left the bedroom and headed to the nursery. Deborah was sitting in a chair, feeding her daughter. When she saw the men, she lifted her head. You're leaving? She asked calmly. Yes. To my parents' place for a few days, and then to a new city. Deborah nodded. I wish you luck, Cody. Truly. No reproaches, no accusations, just a calm wish of good luck, as if to a distant acquaintance. Thank you. And you take care of yourself. And Madison. I will. There was nothing more to say. 2 years of shared life ended in this short, polite exchange. Cody headed for the door, carrying the suitcase in one hand and a bag with documents and a few small items that hadn't fit in the luggage in the other. Every step echoed with a dull ache in his chest, not physical, but emotional. He wasn't leaving an apartment. He was leaving an entire life, now left behind in the past. At the door, he turned around, trying to memorize one last view of the home where he had been happy, where he had dreamed of the future, where his daughter was supposed to grow up. The entryway with its familiar details, the coat hooks he had screwed in himself 2 years ago, the mirror where Deborah fixed her hair before going out, the shoe rack where her small heels stood next to his boots. All of it would stay here, and he would leave with nothing, heading toward an uncertain future in a foreign city. Don't look back, Scott said quietly, standing beside him. It's easier that way. Cody nodded and opened the door. The stairwell smelled familiar, fresh paint from recent repairs, food from neighboring apartments, a hint of stale dampness from poor ventilation. Ordinary smells of an ordinary building he would never live in again. The elevator went down slowly, with its usual creaks and sways. Over the past 2 years, Cody had ridden it hundreds of times, morning trips to work, evenings back home, outings with Deborah to the store or the doctor, hauling heavy bags from the hardware shop while they furnished the apartment. Back then, every ride-up meant returning home to love, comfort, plans for the future. Now it was a descent into nowhere. I called a taxi, Scott said, looking at his phone. It'll be here in 5 minutes. It'll take you to the bus station. I'll get to my parents' place by bus, Cody nodded. And tomorrow morning I'll come back into the city to handle the paperwork. Don't be late. Court at 9, notary at 10. After that, you'll have time until the evening train to wrap up the last things. They stepped outside. The October evening was cold and windy, with low clouds and a fine drizzle. Streetlights trembled in puddles, casting yellow reflections. People hurried home, clutching bags, turning up their collars. All of them were rushing to their families, to dinner, to warm homes where they were expected. And he was leaving his family, leaving shattered happiness behind. The black cars were gone. Crawford's people had vanished as suddenly as they'd appeared. Scott truly had serious influence if one call could cancel a visit like that. Tell me, if I'd refused your terms, would there really have been criminal charges? Scott looked at him closely. Does it matter to you? Just curious. You wouldn't destroy the life of your granddaughter's father just out of revenge, would you? Not out of revenge, Scott replied after a pause. Out of necessity. If you'd stayed in Deborah and Madison's lives, you would have kept destroying them slowly, but surely. Gambling addiction isn't a cold that passes on its own. It's a chronic illness that requires serious treatment. He took out a cigarette and lit it. And you don't want treatment. You want the problem to disappear on its own, for you to be forgiven, for everything to go back to how it was. That doesn't happen. Until you admit how serious your addiction is and truly start fighting it, you'll be a threat to everyone you care about. Cody wanted to argue, to say he was ready to get help, that he understood his mistakes. But the word stuck in his throat. Scott was right now. Cody still didn't feel ready for a long, painful fight with his addiction. He wanted an easy solution, quick forgiveness, a return to normal life. So yes, Scott continued, if you hadn't agreed to leave voluntarily, we would have had to force it. And believe me, a criminal case would have been just the beginning. I have enough connections to make your life very difficult. A taxi pulled up, an old white Honda with a dented bumper and dirty windows. The driver rolled down the window and called out, "Who ordered the ride to the bus station?" Cody raised his hand and walked over. Scott followed and helped load the suitcase into the trunk. One last piece of advice, Scott said as Cody was getting into the car. In the new city, find a Gamblers Anonymous group. They exist in every big city. Don't try to handle this alone, you won't. Cody nodded and closed the door. The taxi pulled away slowly, and in the rear window he watched Scott's figure shrink until it disappeared around the corner. The driver, a man in his 50s with unshaven stubble and the smell of cheap cigarettes, tried to make conversation. Going far? Train or bus? Bus, Cody answered shortly, not wanting to talk. I thought train. The suitcase is pretty big. So you're leaving for a while? For a long time. Maybe forever. Who knew if he'd ever return to this city? Or if he'd even want to? Yes, for a long time, he said and turned to the window. The city drifted past familiar streets where he'd grown up and spent most of his life. The school he attended. The college he graduated from. The cafe where he kissed Deborah for the first time. And there the courthouse where they got married 2 years ago, and where tomorrow they would finalize their divorce. How quickly everything had changed. Back then it felt like a whole life lay ahead, full of love and happiness. Now that life was ending before it had truly begun. The bus station greeted him with its usual noise and bustle. People with suitcases hurried to buses, said goodbye to loved ones, bought tickets at the counters. An ordinary evening at a regional bus terminal, some arriving, some leaving, life going on. A ticket to his parents' town cost $10. The bus left in half an hour. Cody bought the ticket and sat on a bench in the waiting hall, placing the suitcase beside him. Around him sat other passengers, an elderly woman with an enormous bag, a young mother with a small child, several men in work clothes, likely heading home after a shift. Each had their own story, their own joys and troubles. But none of them looked as lost as Cody felt. He took out his phone and almost called his parents to warn them he was coming. Then he changed his mind. What would he say? That he'd lost everything, gambled away their savings, driven his family to divorce? That he was coming home with his tail between his legs? His parents would learn everything tomorrow. Tonight, they could stay unaware a little longer. Time dragged on. Cody scrolled through the news on his phone, but he couldn't focus on reading. His thoughts kept returning to what was happening right now in his former home. Deborah was probably feeding Madison before bedtime. Scott was helping her pack the baby's things for tomorrow's move. Maybe they were already talking about the future, where to find a good pediatrician, which daycare to choose, when Deborah might be able to go back to work. Life without him was falling into place with surprising ease. Finally, boarding for his bus was announced. Cody stood up, grabbed his suitcase, and headed for the platform. The bus was old, with worn seats and fogged-up windows, but it was warm. Cody took a seat by the window in the middle of the bus and leaned back tiredly. The 2-hour ride to his parents' town gave him time to think about what he would say to his mother and father. There was no hiding the truth. Tomorrow he had to return to the city to sign documents, and the day after that he was leaving for another state. Changes this drastic required explanations. His mother would cry. His father would stay silent and sigh heavily. He was a man of few words, but he always took his children's failures hard. And Cody was their only son, a late and deeply wanted child. They had been so proud of his wedding, so happy about Deborah's pregnancy, so excited to become grandparents. Now they would have to explain to neighbors why their son suddenly divorced and left town. They would have to endure sympathetic looks and awkward questions. In a small town, everyone knows everyone, and stories like this spread fast. The bus pulled onto the highway, and fields, forests, and small settlements slid past the windows. Places familiar since childhood, once associated with home, safety, and belonging. Now they felt foreign. Or maybe he had become foreign to them. Passengers gradually fell asleep to the steady rocking and hum of the engine. Cody tried to sleep too, but it wouldn't come. His mind spun with thoughts about the past and the future, about what had been and what might have been if he hadn't made fatal mistakes. Meanwhile, back in the city, Deborah was laying Madison down in her crib for the night. The baby breathed softly, occasionally lifting her tiny fists in her sleep. Deborah stood nearby, watching her daughter and thinking about the life she would give her. Without a father, it would be hard. But it was better to grow up without a father than with one who couldn't provide either financial or emotional safety. Better to know there is no father than to live in constant fear of what he might do next. "We'll manage, my little one," Deborah whispered softly. "I'll do everything to make you happy. I promise." At the same time, Scott was calling an old friend in Seattle, the director of a large construction company. He was arranging work for Cody, explaining the situation, asking him to keep an eye on his former son-in-law and not let him slip back onto the wrong path. "I understand, Mike," the friend replied. "We see cases like this all the time. We'll take him, give him a chance. But what if he goes back to his old ways? Then out he goes immediately. No sentimentality." "Fair enough," Scott agreed. "That's all I'm asking." After the call, Scott sat by the window for a long time, smoking and looking out into the yard. Tomorrow a new chapter would begin for his family. His daughter and granddaughter would move in with him, and he would have to become not only a grandfather, but the main male figure in Madison's life at least for the first few years. The responsibility was enormous. He would need to help Deborah recover after childbirth, help her find work when her maternity leave ended. He would need to give Madison a decent childhood, a good education, a reliable foundation. And most importantly, he needed to show his granddaughter that men can be different, that there are men you can rely on. Scott didn't regret his decision. Yes, he had spent over $100,000 fixing his son-in-law's mess. Yes, he had used connections and spent years' worth of accumulated influence. But his family's safety was worth it. Besides, maybe Cody really would change. Maybe the harsh lesson would help him, and in a few years he would be a different man. Scott had seen many things in life. Sometimes people truly did change after serious shocks. But even if Cody changed for the better, there would be no road back. Too much pain had been caused, too much trust destroyed. Deborah would need a new man, reliable, honest, ready to be a father to someone else's child. Such men existed. And Scott would do everything he could to help his daughter meet one. Meanwhile, the bus was approaching the town. Familiar landmarks flashed past the windows: the old water tower, the abandoned farm, the turn toward the lake where he had fished with his father as a child. In a few minutes, he would be home, in his parents' house where his childhood and youth had passed. But this wouldn't be a return home. It would be a temporary stop on the way into the unknown. The town greeted him with silence and darkness. Most houses were already asleep, only a few windows glowing with yellow light. His parents' house was dark too. They went to bed early, as was common in small towns. Cody quietly opened the gate and walked along the familiar path to the porch. The key was under the flower pot with the geranium, where it had always been, as long as he could remember. Some things in the world never changed. He carefully opened the door and stepped into the entryway. It smelled like home, that special smell every family has, impossible to describe. The smell of childhood, safety, unconditional love. The house was warm and quiet. His parents were asleep in their room, unaware of the drama that had unfolded in their son's life. Tomorrow morning, they would learn everything. Cody undressed and went into his old room. It had remained almost unchanged since he left to study in the city, the same wallpaper, the same furniture, the same books on the shelves. As if time had stopped here. He lay down on the narrow single bed he had slept on as a child and teenager and closed his eyes. For the first time in many months, he didn't need to worry, plan, or lie. He could simply lie there and try to fall asleep. But sleep still wouldn't come. His thoughts returned to Deborah, to Madison, to the home he had left forever. What were they doing now? Sleeping? Or was Deborah lying awake, thinking about tomorrow? Or maybe she felt relief. Maybe she could finally sleep peacefully, without fearing that her husband wouldn't come home until morning or would come home drunk, without dreading new debts or new lies. Perhaps his departure really was a release for her. The thought was painful, but probably fair. And if so, then he had done the right thing by agreeing to the divorce. Sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing how to let go. Outside, the wind rustled through the old poplar trees planted near the house back in his grandfather's time. He remembered that sound from childhood. It used to calm him, help him fall asleep. Now it sounded sad, like a farewell song. Tomorrow a new life would begin for him, for Deborah, for little Madison. What it would be like, no one knew yet. Morning came early in the town, as it always did in provincial homes. Cody woke up to the sound of a door opening. His mother came into the room with a cup of tea in her hands, just as she had done many years ago when he was still in school. "Cody, wake up. The tea will get cold," she said softly, placing the cup on the bedside table. Kim was nearly 70, small and thin, with soft gray hair and kind brown eyes. She had worked her whole life as a teacher at the local school, raising more than one generation of town children. Cody was her only child, late and deeply wanted. He had been born when she was already 42. She looked at her son closely, with that mother's gaze that always sees more than it should. "You look pale. And thinner. Is Deborah feeding you well?" Cody sat up on the bed, rubbing his temples. His head ached from a sleepless night and heavy thoughts. How could he explain what had happened? How could he tell a woman who had lived honestly her whole life and never deceived anyone that her son had turned out to be a liar and a squanderer? "Mom, we need to talk." "Seriously?" Kim's face changed instantly. A mother's heart sensed trouble. "What happened? Is Deborah okay? Is the baby all right?" "They're fine. Madison is healthy, a beautiful girl. But me? I have problems." He told his mother everything about his gambling addiction, the debts, the lies, how he had driven his family to divorce. He spoke slowly, struggling to find the words, watching his mother's face grow sadder with each sentence. Kim listened in silence, occasionally shaking her head. When he finished, she stayed quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the autumn garden. "My God," she finally said softly. "How did this happen? I taught you honesty, decency. Mom, it's not your fault. It's my fault. Mine alone." "I know," she sighed. "But it still hurts. I thought I'd raised a good man, and it turns out." She didn't finish, but Cody understood. Turns out she had raised someone who destroyed his own family. "What now?" she asked. "Where will you live? How will you live?" Cody told her about the agreement with Scott, about the job in Seattle, about starting over in another state. "It's good that Scott is that kind of man," his mother said. "He could have acted differently, and no one would have blamed him." She stood up and went to the window. "I feel sorry for Deborah. She's a good girl, kind. And the baby will grow up without a father. Though maybe it's for the best. Better without a father than with one like that." The words sounded like a verdict. If even his own mother thought a child was better off without him. "Where's Dad?" Cody asked. "In the garden. You'll have to tell him too." Wayne took the news even harder than his wife. He was a man of few words, used to honest work and simple principles. A son who lied to his wife, gambled away family money, and brought things to divorce didn't fit his idea of what a man should be. "How could you?" was all he said, looking at Cody with pain and disbelief. How could you do that to your wife and child? He didn't say anything else all day, just kept busy with chores. And Cody understood that his father was more ashamed of him than he would have been if his son had gone to prison for a fight or theft. Those crimes were at least understandable. This betraying the people closest to you was unforgivable. At 8 in the morning, Cody boarded a bus back to the city. He had to be at court by 9. The road felt endless, even though it took the same 2 hours. Every mile separated him from his past life and brought him closer to the final outcome. The courthouse on Riverside Avenue was a small building with tall windows and heavy doors. Cody had walked past it many times but had only gone inside once 2 years earlier, when he and Deborah filed their marriage application. Back then, they stood in line holding hands, whispering sweet words to each other. Deborah was in a white dress, he was in a new suit. They were so happy, so sure of their future. Other couples smiled at them, their love was obvious to everyone. Now he stood in line again, but a different one for divorce. Around him were other people with sad faces, also there to destroy what they had once built with hope and joy. At exactly 9 o'clock, Deborah entered the courthouse. She was pale but composed, dressed in a strict dark suit. When she saw Cody, she nodded to him politely, like an acquaintance with whom one keeps civil relations. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi. How's Madison?" "Fine. She slept all night, didn't wake up." There was nothing more to say. They stood side by side, waiting to be called to the desk to process the paperwork. The divorce procedure took half an hour. A court clerk, a middle-aged, heavy-set woman in a formal suit, monotonously read standard phrases, filled out forms, and asked the required questions. "Is the decision to dissolve the marriage mutual and final?" "Yes," they answered together. "No disputes regarding division of property?" "No." "Minor child remains with the mother by mutual consent?" "Yes." Each answer sounded like a hammer strike, driving a nail into the coffin of their marriage. When everything was finished, they received the divorce certificates. Officially, they were no longer husband and wife. Deborah put the document into her purse and headed for the exit. "Deborah," Cody called after her. She turned around. "What is it?" I want you to know I never meant to hurt you. Everything that happened was beyond my will." Deborah looked at him for a long moment. "Cody, nothing happens beyond our will. We make choices every day, every minute. You chose gambling over your family. I choose my daughter's safety over trying to save a marriage. Everyone is responsible for their own choices." She turned and walked away. Cody watched her until she disappeared behind the door. He would never see her again. At 9:30, he was at the office of the notary, Tara Owens. Scott was already waiting in the reception area, holding a folder of documents. "You're 10 minutes late," he said sternly. "I'm sorry. The court procedure took longer than expected." "All right. Let's go and finish the rest." The notary, Tara, was a woman in her 60s, with gray hair and attentive eyes behind glasses. She carefully reviewed the documents, verified identities, and began the formal process. Cody signed paper after paper, giving up all rights to property, to the child, to alimony. With every signature, he lost everything that tied him to his past life. "You understand that you are giving up your parental rights permanently," the notary clarified. "Restoring them later will be practically impossible." "I understand," Cody replied. Scott remained silent, watching the procedure. When everything was finished, he handed Cody an envelope. "Here are certificates confirming that all debts have been paid, recommendation letters, and a train ticket to Seattle. Departure at 8 this evening." "Thank you. And one more thing." Scott took out a second envelope. $1,500 to get you started. That should cover a month or two until your first paycheck." Cody took the money, knowing it wasn't a gift, but the price of disappearing from the family's life forever. "Here are the contact details of my friend in Seattle," Scott continued. "Call him tomorrow morning. He knows the situation. The job isn't anything special, site supervisor at a construction site, but it's honest work. And remember the main rule, no attempts to contact Deborah or to find out anything about Madison." "Agreed?" "Agreed." They stepped out of the notary's office onto the street. The day was gray and cold, with a fine drizzle falling. People hurried past, unaware of the two men who had just finalized the end of a family. "Goodbye," Scott said and walked toward his car. "Goodbye," Cody replied, but his former father-in-law was already gone. Cody still had 10 hours before his train. He didn't want to go back to his parents' house to explain that everything was over, to see their sadness and shame. Instead, he decided to walk around the city, to say goodbye to the places where his life had unfolded. He walked to the city center, past the monument to the city's founder, then along the main pedestrian street toward the theater. He remembered going there with Deborah in the first months of their relationship, how she laughed at comedies and cried at dramas, while he watched not the stage, but her, thinking how beautiful she was and how lucky he was to have met her. Then he went into the cafe where they had kissed for the first time. Back then, it had been a modest student cafe with cheap pastries and instant coffee. Now it was a trendy restaurant with expensive dishes and a pretentious atmosphere. But the corner table where they had sat that evening was still in the same place. Cody ordered coffee and sat at that very table. He remembered how nervous he had been, how he didn't know what to say, how afraid he was of seeming uninteresting. Deborah had been so lively, so smart, so beautiful. It had seemed unbelievable that she agreed to date him. And she laughed at his jokes, talked about her plans for the future, dreamed of a family, children, and the home they would build together. There had been such faith in their shared happiness in her eyes that Cody had wanted to move mountains just to live up to her trust. Now he had betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. Later that afternoon, he went to their former apartment building. Not to go inside, just to look one last time. Scott's car was parked by the entrance, and next to it was a moving truck. Apparently, Deborah and her daughter were already moving out. Cody hid around the corner of the neighboring building and watched. Movers carried out baby items: the crib, the stroller, bags of clothes. Then Deborah herself appeared, holding Madison. She looked tired, but determined. Scott helped her into the car, carefully securing his granddaughter in the car seat. Then they drove away, with the moving truck following behind. That was it. Nothing of their family remained in that building. Cody stood there a little longer, looking at the windows of the apartment where he had been happy for 2 years. Then he turned and walked away. That evening, he sat in the waiting hall of the train station. The train was delayed by an hour, nothing unusual for long-distance routes. Cody wasn't in a hurry. Now he had all the time in the world. The station was crowded and noisy. Trains were announced, passengers dragged suitcases, people saying goodbye hugged those who were leaving. Life went on, people traveled, met, parted. And somewhere in the same city, Deborah was putting Madison to bed in a new room, in her grandfather's home. She was telling her daughter a story, singing a lullaby, planning the next day. Life without him was settling into place with surprising ease. Maybe that was how it was meant to be. Maybe he had simply been an extra link in a chain that worked perfectly well without him. Finally, boarding for his train was announced. Cody picked up his suitcase and headed for the platform. The train was long and modern, with comfortable compartments and air conditioning. His seat was in the middle of the train, a window seat in a 4-berth compartment. His travel companions were an elderly woman with her teenage grandson and a middle-aged man in a business suit. Each of them was traveling for their own reasons, toward new lives or back to old ones. Everyone had a story, plans, hopes. Cody had plans too modest, but realistic. Find a job, rent a place, start a new life without debts or lies. Maybe, someday, meet a woman who wouldn't know about his past. Maybe even build a new family. But all of that was far in the future. For now, he just needed to move forward and not look back. The train slowly pulled away from the station. Outside the window, the lights of the city drifted past the city where he was born, grew up, studied, worked, got married, became a father, and destroyed his own family. A city he would never return to. Gradually, the lights thinned out, leaving only darkness and the flicker of passing lamps. Ahead lay a journey of thousands of miles, and at its end a new life. Whether it would be good or bad depended only on him. At the same time, Deborah stood by the window in her new apartment, also looking at the city lights. Madison slept peacefully in her crib, now standing in a bright, spacious room overlooking the park. "Everything will be fine, my little one," she whispered softly to her daughter. "We'll manage. Our whole life is ahead of us, and it will be beautiful and honest." Scott sat in the next room, reading the evening news. From time to time, he glanced at his daughter and granddaughter, and his face showed the calm confidence of a man who knew he had done the right thing. The family was safe. The threats were gone. Ahead lay new days full of caring for the child, making plans for the future, and slowly returning to a normal life. Meanwhile, the train kept carrying Cody farther west, to Seattle, toward an unknown future. And perhaps that was for the best for everyone. 3 years passed. Deborah stood by the window of her new apartment in the city center, looking out at the autumn park where mothers walked with their children. Leaves swirled through the air like golden rain, and 4-year-old Madison pressed her nose to the glass, pointing excitedly. "Mom, look how beautiful it is. The leaves are dancing." "Yes, sweetheart, it's very beautiful," Deborah smiled, brushing her daughter's bangs aside. Madison had grown into a cheerful, bright little girl. She looked just like her mother, the same brown eyes, the same dark hair, the same open view of the world. There seemed to be nothing of her father in her, and Deborah was glad of that. Let her daughter grow up without carrying the weight of someone else's mistakes. "Mom, when are we going to Grandpa Mike's?" Madison asked, turning away from the window. "Tomorrow, baby. Grandpa is working late today." Scott was still head of security at the metallurgical plant, but now he spent most of his time not in his office, but with his granddaughter. He adored Madison and tried to make up for her lack of a father with his attention and care. He took her to theaters and museums, read her fairy tales, taught her how to ride a bike. The girl returned his love and called him her best friend in the world. A lot had changed in Deborah's life over these years. The first year was the hardest. She hadn't yet recovered from the psychological shock of the divorce, struggled with guilt and self-doubt. It seemed she was doomed to be alone, that no normal man would want to build a life with a woman who had a child from another relationship. But time heals, and little by little the wounds closed. Work helped. When Madison turned 1, Deborah took a position as chief accountant at a large trading company. The job was interesting and well paid, the team friendly. Life slowly began to settle. And 6 months ago, Hugh appeared in her life. Hugh Vernon, 32, a surgeon at the city hospital. Tall, calm, reliable, with kind eyes and steady hands. They met by chance. Madison fell at the playground and scraped her knee, and he happened to be nearby and helped clean the wound. "You need to put on a bandage and show her to a trauma specialist," he told Deborah then. "And so she won't be scared, I'll give her this toy." The toy turned out to be a small plush teddy bear that Hugh always carried in his pocket for especially frightened little patients. Madison immediately loved the bear and named him Dr. Danny. After that came chance meetings in the park, long conversations on a bench while Madison played in the sandbox. Hugh turned out to be a man of rare emotional tact. He didn't ask about the child's father, didn't push, didn't rush anything. He simply, almost imperceptibly, became part of their lives. He bonded with Madison right away. The girl instinctively felt safety and kindness in him and reached for him like a plant toward the light. Hugh patiently answered all her endless whys, pushed her on the swings, built snowmen with her in winter, and floated paper boats in puddles in spring. "Mom, is Danny coming to see us today?" Madison asked now. "I don't know, sweetheart. He works at the hospital, helping sick people." "Is he a good doctor?" "A very good one." "And when will he become my dad?" Deborah froze. Madison had never asked directly about her father before. Apparently she sensed it was a painful subject for her mother. But now that a man had appeared in their lives, the questions were inevitable. "Sweetheart, do you want Danny to be your dad?" Madison thought seriously. "Yes, I do. He's kind and smart. And he doesn't yell like Peter's dad from kindergarten. And he buys me ice cream. And he knows lots of stories." Deborah smiled. Out of the mouth of a child. Hugh really did have all the qualities she wanted to see in a father for her child. Yesterday, he had proposed. Not in a restaurant with flowers and music, but at home, while they were putting Madison to bed. He simply took her hand and said, "Deborah, I want us to be a family. A real family. I love you and Madison, and I'm ready to take responsibility for your happiness." She asked for time to think. Not because she doubted her feelings for Hugh. She loved him with the quiet, steady love of a mature woman. But past experience had taught her caution. She needed to be sure the decision was made with her mind, not just her heart. The phone rang. Deborah picked it up. Her father was calling. "Deborah, how are you?" "How's Madison?" "All good, Dad. Madison is playing. I'm making dinner." "Listen, that doctor of yours. Hugh. Are you serious about him?" Scott, of course, already knew about the proposal. There were no secrets in their family. "I am, Dad. He's a good man." "I know. I checked. His reputation is spotless. Valued at work, respected by colleagues. No hidden debts, no bad habits, no dark spots in his past." Deborah smiled. Her father was still her father, still checking everyone who entered their lives. "So what do you think?" "I think Madison needs a father. A real father who will love and protect her. And you need a husband who won't make you ashamed of his actions. So you approve?" "I do. But the decision is yours. You're an adult woman, a mother, you have life experience. I trust your choice." After the call with her father, Deborah felt relief. Her last doubts disappeared. Yes, she would say yes to Hugh. Madison deserved a complete family, and she herself deserved happiness. And meanwhile, thousands of kilometers away, in Seattle, another person was also thinking about family and happiness. Cody stood at a construction site, inspecting the work of a team of bricklayers. Over 3 years, he had gone from an ordinary laborer to a site supervisor. Not a brilliant career, but a respectable one for a man who had started from scratch in an unfamiliar city. The construction job turned out to be exactly what he needed. Physical labor helped him stop dwelling on the past, and responsibility for the site and the crew forced him to focus on the present. The pay was decent, and his housing, a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts, was simple but his own. The first months in Seattle were hell. Loneliness, homesickness, guilt toward the family he had left behind. More than once, Cody was on the verge of breaking, going back to his hometown, begging Deborah for forgiveness, promising to change. But Scott hadn't warned him about the consequences for nothing. What helped was the Gamblers Anonymous group Cody joined on his former father-in-law's advice. The first meetings were hard. Admitting his weaknesses to strangers felt humiliating. But gradually he realized no one there judged him. There were people just like him, who had destroyed their lives with gambling and were trying to start over. The group was led by Dr. Lewis, a psychologist with 20 years of experience working with addicts, a strict but fair woman who didn't let participants feel sorry for themselves or look for excuses. "You can't change the past," she said at every meeting. "You can only learn from it and avoid repeating mistakes in the future. Every day you make a choice to live the old way or a new way. And every day you are responsible for that choice." Cody attended the group for 2 years, then stayed in touch with some of the members for another year. It helped him stay steady in hard moments, not return to the destructive habit. Now he could walk past betting shops and casinos without feeling that familiar itch in his fingers. The addiction hadn't disappeared completely. Dr. Lewis warned it would stay with him for life, but he had learned to manage it. His personal life improved more slowly. Early attempts at dating went nowhere. Cody was afraid to open up, to talk about his past. And without trust, serious relationships are impossible. But 6 months ago, Shelley appeared in his life. Shelley Weston, 28, an elementary school teacher. Petite, fair-haired, with a gentle nature and kind eyes. They met in a bookstore, both choosing gifts for children, she for her nephew, he for a colleague's son. Shelley immediately sensed that Cody was hiding something painful in his past. But she didn't press him, gave him time to open up on his own. And when he finally told her everything, she didn't judge him, didn't run away, didn't lecture him about morality. "Everyone deserves a second chance," she said simply. "The important thing is wanting to be better than you were before." Since then, they had been seeing each other regularly. Shelley introduced him to her friends, he told his colleagues about her. The relationship grew slowly, without rushing, with mutual respect and understanding. Recently, Cody started thinking about proposing. But one thought wouldn't let him go. He didn't know what was happening with his daughter. Was she alive? Healthy? Happy? What did she look like now? Did she remember him at all, even in her dreams? Scott had warned that any attempt to learn anything about Deborah's and Madison's lives would have serious consequences. And Cody hadn't broken the rule. He didn't call, didn't write, didn't look for information through mutual acquaintances. But sometimes, especially at night when he couldn't sleep, he thought about his daughter. Did she speak in full sentences yet? Did she go to kindergarten? Did she love fairy tales? Who did she resemble more, her mother or him? And most importantly, did Deborah tell her that she once had a father? Or did she prefer silence, erasing him from the family story like a failed experiment? Probably the latter. And that was fair. The workday ended, the crew went home. Cody gathered the tools, locked the psych trailer that served as his office, and headed to the bus stop. On the way, he stopped by a flower shop. It was Shelley's birthday today, and they were planning to celebrate in a restaurant that evening. A bouquet of tulips, her favorite flowers, was expensive, but Cody didn't hesitate. Over 3 years, he had learned to value simple human joys, flowers for the woman he loved, a good dinner, a quiet evening at home. At the bus stop, he ran into Ben, a coworker and friend. Ben was a site supervisor on a neighboring project, cheerful and outgoing, with a big family and plenty of problems he handled with enviable optimism. "Cody, why so pensive?" Ben asked. "Work trouble?" "No, work's fine. Personal stuff." "Ah, got it. Your Shelley's a good one, but you're dragging your feet. Time to propose, or she'll think you're not serious." Cody sighed. Ben was right. Shelley deserved clarity. "I am thinking about it. It's just complicated." "What's complicated?" "You love her, marry her. You don't break up. Why drag it out? If only it were that simple." Ben didn't know about Cody's past, about the daughter living somewhere without him. Did he have the right to build a new family without even trying to know how the old one lived? The bus arrived packed, as always during rush hour. Cody and Ben squeezed into the crowd and rode home, to their women, their problems, their joys. And thousands of kilometers away, little Madison was falling asleep in her crib to a soft lullaby sung by her mother. She dreamed of golden leaves, a plush teddy bear, and the kind Dr. Danny, who had promised to become her dad. She didn't remember another father, the one who left when she was just a tiny baby. In her world, there was only Mom, Grandpa Mike, and Danny. And that world was enough to be happy. Deborah sat in the next room, reading a book, but her thoughts were far from the story. Tomorrow she would say yes to Hugh, and a new chapter of their life would begin. Madison would get a father, she would get a husband, and Hugh would get the family he had dreamed of. The past would stay in the past. They would build new happiness on the ruins of old mistakes, and it would be stronger because it was earned and conscious. The doorbell rang. Deborah opened the door. Hugh stood on the threshold with a bouquet of white roses and a guilty smile. "I know it's late, but I couldn't wait until tomorrow. How are things? Is Madison asleep?" "She is." "Come in, just be quiet." He walked into the living room, put the flowers in a vase, and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "So, did you think it over?" Deborah looked into his eyes, honest, calm, reliable. Eyes like that don't lie or betray. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes? Yes." He kissed her gently, carefully, the way you kiss something very precious and fragile. "I'll make you happy," he whispered. "You and Madison. I promise." "I know," Deborah replied. "Otherwise, I wouldn't have agreed." And somewhere far away, in Seattle, Cody was sitting in a restaurant across from Shelley, turning a small ring box over in his hands. He had bought it a month ago, but still couldn't bring himself to propose. "Cody, you seem off tonight," Shelley noticed. "Maybe we should postpone the celebration." "No, it's fine. It's just... Shelley, there's something I need to tell you." He told her about his doubts, about his thoughts of his daughter, about not knowing whether he had the right to new happiness. Shelley silently took his hand. "Cody, you can't live your whole life in the past. You have a chance to become better, to build a new family, to be a good husband and father. That's not a betrayal of your daughter, it's the lesson you learned from your mistakes. But what if one day, many years from now, she'll find you herself if she wants to? And for now, live in the present. I love you for who you are now, not for who you were before." Cody took out the ring box. "Shelley, will you marry me?" "Yes," she smiled. Of course, yes. So on the same evening, two women in different parts of the country said yes to two men who offered them a new beginning. And maybe that was symbolic. Life goes on, people get a second chance, and love overcomes past mistakes. And little Madison slept in her crib, dreaming of a big, happy family where everyone loved each other and no one ever left. And those dreams would come true. Because every person deserves happiness. And every child deserves a loving family. Even if that means letting go of the past and building the future from scratch. Time heals everything. Even the deepest wounds fade someday, if there is love, patience, and faith in something better. 5 more years passed. 10-year-old Madison sat at her desk in her room, doing her homework. She was in 3rd grade at a regular school, got along well with her classmates, loved drawing and dancing. An ordinary happy girl from a complete family. Hugh officially adopted her 3 years earlier, right after his wedding to Deborah. Now Madison carried the last name Vernon and called him Dad. She also had a younger brother, Douglas, who had just turned 1, and she adored helping her mom bathe and feed him. The family was close and strong. Hugh turned out to be exactly the kind of father and husband you could rely on in any situation. He never raised his voice, always made time for the children despite his busy hospital schedule, and helped Deborah around the house. "Madison, dinner's ready," her mom called from the kitchen. "Coming," the girl answered, closing her books. Over dinner, they discussed weekend plans. Hugh suggested going to the lake, to Grandpa Mike's country house. Deborah wanted to go to the theater for a children's play, and Madison dreamed of just walking in the park and skating. "We can fit everything in," Hugh said reasonably. Saturday at Grandpa's place, Sunday the theater and the park. "Will Grandpa Mike come with us?" Madison asked. "Of course," Deborah smiled. "It's his house." By then, Scott had retired and devoted himself entirely to the family. He was a perfect grandfather to both grandchildren, though Douglas held a special place in his heart perhaps because the boy was his blood relative. But he loved Madison no less. She had been, and always would be, his beloved granddaughter, the first and only one for many years. Biology had never mattered to him. After dinner, Madison went back to her homework, while her parents put Douglas to bed. An ordinary family evening in an ordinary happy family. 1,500 kilometers away, in Seattle, Cody and Shelley were also putting their son to bed. 5-year-old Max was his father's spitting image, the same light hair, the same personality, the same love for technical toys. Cody had become a good father. The experience of past mistakes taught him to value family and not take loved ones for granted. He spent a lot of time with his son teaching him to ride a bike, build construction sets, play soccer in the yard. Shelley gave birth to Max a year after their wedding. The pregnancy and delivery were easy, and the boy grew up healthy and cheerful. The family lived modestly but happily in a 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, where every corner was filled with love and care. Cody was no longer just a site foreman. Over 8 years, he had risen to managing a large project, then became deputy head of a construction division. His salary allowed him to support the family and even save for the future. He no longer suffered from gambling addiction. The last time the urge to bet crossed his mind was about 4 years earlier, during serious financial troubles at work. But he resisted, sought help from a psychologist, and worked through it. Now he could honestly say the illness had retreated, not disappeared completely, that never happens, but enough that it no longer interfered with living a full life. Sometimes, very rarely, he thought about Madison. What was she like now? Tall or small? Did she go to school? Did she have brothers or sisters? Did she remember him at all? Probably not. And that was for the best. She had a mother, a grandfather, and surely a stepfather, a good, reliable man who had become her real dad. And he had Max, who knew him as his only father and would never learn that somewhere out there, Dad had another daughter. Some secrets are better taken to the grave. "Dad, are we going to the zoo tomorrow?" Max asked as he settled into bed. "Of course, buddy, if the weather's good. And if it's bad, we'll go to a museum or the circus. Can we go to both?" Cody smiled. At 5 years old, you want everything at once. "We can. There are 2 days off and plenty of places to go." He kissed his son on the forehead, turned off the light, and quietly left the nursery. In the living room, Shelley was waiting for him with a cup of tea and some fresh news. "Cody, do you remember Ben, your coworker?" she asked. "He called today and invited us out of town on Saturday. Says we'll grill some barbecue and the kids can play outside. Sounds like a good idea. Max will love it. And he also said his wife wants to introduce you to her brother. He's a builder too, works in Los Angeles, here on vacation. Why do I need to meet him?" "Well, it might come in handy. Connections in construction are never a bad thing." Cody nodded. Shelley was a practical woman and always thought ahead. Maybe the introduction really would be useful. They finished their tea, talked about weekend plans, and went to bed. An ordinary family evening for ordinary people who had found their happiness and knew how to protect it. And somewhere far away, in another city, 10-year-old Madison lay in her bed, thinking about why some of her classmates had two dads, a biological one and an adoptive one, while she had only one. Her mother had never told her that she once had another father. Maybe one day she would ask directly. But for now, she didn't want to disturb the harmony of their family world with questions about the past. Everything has its time. And time really does put everything in its place. Children's questions receive adult answers, family secrets are revealed when a person is ready to accept them. For now, it was enough that she had her mom, Dad Hugh, Grandpa Mike, and her little brother Douglas. Love isn't measured by blood ties. A real family is the people who are there every day, who share your joys and sorrows, who never abandon you. And Madison had such a family. Just like Max in distant Seattle. Like all children lucky enough to grow up surrounded by love and understanding. And somewhere between these two cities, on a train racing across the country, a business traveler was riding along, unaware that his daughter lived in one city and his son in another. And maybe that was for the best. Because sometimes the greatest act of love is knowing how to let go and not interfere with other people's happiness. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support inspires us to keep bringing you new, engaging stories every day. You can already find our next story on the main page. We wish you all the very best and happiness in life.